noite a todos. Nós vamos conversar hoje com Amos Oz, um dos maiores escritores do Oriente Médio. Ele nasceu em Israel, país que vive em conflito. Mas Amos Oz é um defensor da paz. Ele ganhou mais de 20 prêmios e tem 18 livros publicados, em pelo menos 30 idiomas. No Brasil, são 13 livros que foram publicados pela Companhia das Letras. Amos Oz, boa noite. Uma pesquisa recente diz que 61%, uma pesquisa desses dias, 61% dos israelenses são a favor que o país, Israel, ataque o Irã. Você é a favor de atacar o Irã?
No, I think it will be a serious mistake for Israel to attack Iran for the simple reason that you cannot bomb the know-how, and the Iranians have the know-how. If they are bombed by the United States or by Israel, they will dig deeper under the ground and build the same installations again. They have the know-how, there is no point in bombing them. Instead of bombing the Iranians, it's very important to help the Iranian people to get rid of this terrible dictatorship of the Ayatollahs.
Mas como um escritor israelense pode ajudar o povo iraniano a se livrar da ditadura?
Well, we have to talk to the Iranians. We have to have powerful transmitters, television, radio, leaflets. We have to use every means of communication to communicate to the Iranian people that the whole world will be behind it when it rebels against this nasty dictatorship.
Bom, estão aqui como entrevistadores nesta noite comigo no Roda Viva a correspondente da revista portuguesa Visão, Norma Cury, a professora de literatura brasileira da PUC de São Paulo, a escritora e crítica literária Noemi Jaffe, o editor e jornalista Paulo Werneck, que cuida do caderno Ilustríssimas da Folha de São Paulo e ajudou a editar alguns livros do Amos Oz, e a Monique Gardenberg, que é produtora, diretora de cinema e está, vejam só, providenciando a adaptação de um livro do Amos Oz, Caixa Preta, para um filme que será produzido no Brasil. Vamos fazer a primeira pergunta. Eu pediria ao Paulo Werneck que fizesse a primeira pergunta.
Amos, boa noite. O senhor falou que é contra o ataque de Israel ao Irã. No entanto, em entrevistas, ao explicar o seu tipo de pacifismo, o senhor lembra a declaração de uma tia sua, uma parente sua, que dizia que, veja bem, nós não fomos libertados do campo de concentração por pacifistas à moda europeia, e sim por americanos armados até os dentes. Como é que o senhor define, então, a sua ação pacifista que inclui esse tipo de ação belicosa?
Well, I draw a line between pacifism and peacenik, and I'm a peacenik, not a pacifist, and I'll tell you the difference in a few words. A pacifist believes that a war is the ultimate evil and one should avoid war at all costs. A peacenik like myself maintains that the ultimate evil is aggression, and sometimes aggression has to be repelled by force. I have been on the battlefield twice in my life, in 1967 and in 1973, the two occasions when the Arab countries tried to destroy Israel completely. If this scenario repeats itself, I will go to the battlefield again. But I will refuse to fight over holy places, or over settlements, or over natural resources, or over extra territory for the land. I will only fight for life and for freedom, nothing else.
Então o senhor não vê um cenário de agressão do Irã contra Israel nesse momento?
There might be a scenario of aggression of Iran against Israel, but I don't think Israel will be wise to launch a preemptive strike on Iran before Iran had made an aggressive move against Israel.
Norma Cury vai fazer uma pergunta.
Amos foi o maior dos 12 profetas. E numa entrevista há 4 anos, o senhor disse que o mágico de Oz era seu tio-avô. E também o senhor disse que em 2050 haveria paz no Oriente Médio. Agora o senhor diz que a paz pode vir em 800 anos. O que eu quero saber, o que o profeta Amos e o que seu tio-avô falaria, qual a atitude mágica, qual a palavra mágica que pode trazer paz entre Israel e Palestina e combater o fanatismo dos dois lados, se é que existe.
It's hard to be a prophet coming from the land of the prophets. We have too much competition in the prophecy business, so I wouldn't prophesize. I don't know how long it will take to make peace between Israelis and Palestinians, but I will give you one magic word, and the word is compromise. I'm a great believer in the necessity and the possibility of an historical compromise between Israelis and Palestinians. A compromise which will result in a two-state solution, the state of Palestine next door to the state of Israel and in peace with the state of Israel. This is possible and this will come one day.
O senhor também disse que era um desperdício não fazer a paz com o Mahmoud Abbas. A Unesco acabou de integrar a Palestina e levou chumbo dos Estados Unidos e o Netanyahu também não ficou atrás. Onde está o erro? O erro está no governo de Israel, nos amigos americanos. O Arafat errou mais, o Sharon errou mais. Quem errou mais e quem acertou mais nesse processo?
Everybody made terrible mistakes and everybody missed many opportunities. And the blame goes more or less equally to the Arab leaders and to the Israeli leaders. But as for the Palestinian intention to declare independence and their appeal to the United Nations to recognize them as an independent nation, I'm going to say something which the Israeli government would not like. I would say that Israel would be wise to be the first country in the world to recognize the state of Palestine, for historical reasons. We will then disagree with the Palestinians and negotiate over borders and holy places and settlements and security and water and all the issues. But this will be a debate between two sovereign states, not between occupier and occupied, but between two sovereign states. So if the Israeli government listen to my advice, I will tell them, go ahead, recognize the Palestinians the moment they want to declare independence.
Eles ouvem seus conselhos?
You know, I wrote in my life 500 articles, at least 500 articles, telling my government what to do. They don't listen, but they read the articles. I have been invited by almost every Israeli prime minister. They are in the habit of inviting writers and poets for a private conversation in the apartment, not in the office. And all the prime ministers, they will ask the writers, where have the nation gone wrong? Where do we go from here? They will admire your answers and ignore them completely.
Você sempre diz, Amos, que Israel é a terra do argumento, da discussão, que todo mundo conversa. Agora, para quem vê de fora, aquilo parece que está indo cada vez mais para um terreno de oposição ao mundo árabe, de hostilidade aos palestinos, de um nacionalismo de natureza religiosa, fundamentalista. Qual imagem que você acha que é mais real? A que nós, estrangeiros ou brasileiros, temos, ou a que você diz que é Israel? O Israel que aparece nos seus livros, vamos dizer, nos seus artigos?
There is a huge difference between Israel of the media and Israel of reality. In Israel of the media, you normally see about 80% fanatics and zealots, religious fanatics and fanatic settlers on the West Bank, 19% heartless soldiers at the roadblocks, and 1% wonderful intellectuals like myself who criticize the government and call for peace. This is totally false. In fact, Israel is a nation of 8 million citizens, 8 million prime ministers, 8 million prophets and messiahs. Every Israeli with his or her personal formula for redemption. Israel is an open-air seminary. If you promise me to take the following with a big grain of salt, I will tell you that Israel is not a nation, it is a collection of arguments. It's very hard to get two Israelis to agree with each other on anything.
Sim, mas me perdoe, 61%, saiu a pesquisa ontem, dizem que é a favor de atacar o Irã. Quer dizer, uma hora se chega a uma conclusão e aí é uma imagem que fica, né?
But if you go to talk to everyone, to this 61%, you will find out that everyone has a different strategy on what to do with Iran. You won't get two of them to agree with each other. It's hard to get even one to agree with himself or herself because everyone is ambivalent, everyone has a divided mind and soul.
Monique, você quer fazer uma pergunta?
Você escolheu morar no deserto de Negev e minha pergunta é se essa escolha é apenas a necessidade do escritor de estar em silêncio, isolado, ou se tem uma dimensão filosófica também de renúncia, de desilusão.
No, it's not philosophical and it's not even about the needs of a writer. 25 years ago, my young son developed a very bad allergic asthma. His doctors prescribed for him mountain desert air. So we moved to Arad. Now my son has recovered and he lives in Tel Aviv, but his parents still love the desert and they stayed in Arad.
Oh, so
This is the whole story.
So simple, yeah.
Noemi?
Eu diria que a sua luta é tanto pela paz como contra o fanatismo. E tem até um livro seu, que eu gosto muito, que se chama Contra o Fanatismo. Eu escolhi uma frase aqui que diz assim: um fanático é alguém que não consegue mudar de opinião e também não muda de assunto. E eu fiz um pequeno levantamento de alguns personagens de alguns livros seus. Então, por exemplo, o Uri, o Prof, o Fima, são personagens inseguros, desajeitados, contraditórios. O senhor diria que o senhor tenta fazer com que esses personagens sejam também, pela própria personalidade deles, opositores do fanatismo? O senhor acha que o fanático é aquele que tem certeza e quem, o inseguro, está combatendo o fanatismo?
The fanatic is a walking exclamation mark. This is my definition of a fanatic. He has all the answers and he is not interested in the questions. He has the answers. Now, I wrote about fanatics, but I also wrote about very skeptical people. I wrote a lot about fanatics, for instance, in Black Box, where almost everybody is fanatic one way or another. But I wrote many books and stories like FEMA, like Panther in the Basement, where the protagonist is ambivalent, skeptical, and full of humor. I find sense of humor the best antidote to fanaticism. I have never seen a fanatic with a sense of humor, nor have I ever seen a person with a sense of humor becoming a fanatic.
Amos, eu li uma outra, a Norma falou, mas eu li uma outra reportagem que você fez há alguns anos com o David Remick, e você falava que Israel ia levar menos tempo para resolver suas questões com os palestinos do que a Europa. Você falava que a Europa levou 1000 anos para definir suas fronteiras, as questões religiosas, e que Israel ia levar menos tempo. A literatura israelense, em que pé está nesses 1000 anos? A literatura, às vezes, me parece que seus livros sempre têm a obrigação de falar da identidade nacional, da formação de Israel. É um assunto obrigatório, assim como para nós fica quase obrigatório escrever sobre o Brasil, escrever sobre a nação, ou você gostaria de escrever outra coisa também?
Yeah. Well, my books are not statements. When I want to make a statement, I write an angry article and I tell the government to go to hell. They read my articles and they don't go to hell. But I also have the urge to tell stories. And the urge to tell is very different than the urge to say. The urge to tell has to do with curiosity. I'm a great believer in curiosity. I believe curiosity is a moral virtue. I believe a curious person is a better person than a person who is not curious. I even believe that a curious person is a better lover than a person who is not curious, but it's too early in the day to discuss the lover aspect of curiosity. However, I write about individuals, small-time people, not about the leaders, not about those who make the history, but about small-time people, about those people who are the victims of history and not about the makers of history. I don't write in my novels where Israel should go. This I do in my articles. In my novels, I write about the past, not about the future.
Agora, um dos seus livros mais conhecidos e mais admirados, o senhor me corrija se eu estou errado, é o do Amor e Sombras, que é um livro de memórias, é um livro também sobre a formação de Israel, um país de imigrantes, como o senhor mostra, uma família de gente muito maluca também, né? A grande arte sua não seria também sobre a formação de Israel, né? Através dessas poucas pessoas, dessas pessoas simples, esse país que está se formando?
Well, yes, I am, but not in the great historical terms. In the everyday terms. I write about refugees. I write about survivors. I write about terrified people who left Europe behind, but never ceased to love Europe and to miss Europe. I write about an unrequited love for Europe. I write about people who hoped to find paradise in Jerusalem and find no paradise. I write about people who have been through hell, through the Holocaust, through terrible persecution, and hoped to come to the homeland and find peace, and they found no peace. So I write about the disappointments, about the hopes, and about the dreams.
E escrever nesse idioma, o hebreu, é complicado, porque é pequeno, ele não tem penetração internacional, não tem uma tradição literária muito eloquente, vamos dizer assim. Como é que o senhor lida escrevendo nesse idioma tão novo e tão pequeno?
Hebrew is a wonderful musical instrument. And I love the Hebrew language. I'm not a chauvinist for the country, but I am a chauvinist for my language. Hebrew is a very ancient language. For 17 centuries, it has been as dead as ancient Greek or as Latin. About 120 years ago, not more, it came back to life with Elizabethan vigor. Contemporary Hebrew is like Elizabethan English. A writer of Hebrew can take Shakespearean liberties with the language, legislate into the language, create new forms, create new idioms, invent new words. I'm not suggesting that every one of our poets is a William Shakespeare. We only have half a dozen Shakespeares in Tel Aviv right now. But the temptation is there. It's a marvelous musical instrument to work with, and I am proud and happy and delighted to work in the Hebrew language.
O senhor definiu numa entrevista escrever em hebraico moderno seria como tocar música de câmara numa catedral vazia, e que é perigoso, às vezes, lançar a mão de determinadas palavras podem evocar, podem ressoar monstruosidades. O senhor também se comparou nessa entrevista que o Mário Sérgio citou com Remnick, com Tom Sawyer ou Huckleberry Finn, dizendo que o senhor seria como esses personagens da literatura americana que personificam a história do país. O senhor também é o fundador da literatura em hebraico moderno, não só de Israel, mas Existe alguma experiência literária hoje em Israel que fuja à questão histórica, seja ela política ou seja a história no microscópio, como o senhor faz?
Well, I and my colleagues stand on the shoulders of giants. In the beginning of the 20th century, there was a wonderful group of modern Hebrew writers who formed and created the modern Hebrew, a language in which today, even as you and I speak, in this ancient language, people fly jumbo jets and people conduct open heart surgeries and people launch satellites into orbit in Hebrew. So I stand on the shoulders of giants. Nonetheless, it's difficult because, as you have just mentioned, you are playing chamber music inside the huge empty cathedral. If you are not careful, you will bring the prophets and the psalms into a little family disagreement on who takes the garbage out after dinner. So you have to be very careful, unless you want for parodical reasons or ironical reasons or entertainment reasons, unless you deliberately want to bring the prophets and the Old Testament into the family quarrel. But otherwise you have to be very careful with your selection of words.
Se os seus livros não são traduzidos para o idioma árabe, Como é que uns podem compreender os outros? E você lê a literatura árabe, convive com intelectuais árabes como Eduardo Said, e com judeus como Saul Bellow ou Woody Allen. Como que essa fusão é feita entre...
Well, in the first place, 3 of my books were translated into Arabic.
3.
Very recently, A Tale of Love and Darkness appeared in Lebanon with a very brave Lebanese publisher whose life was threatened by Hezbollah and who had the courage to bring out A Tale of Love and Darkness and distribute it all over the Arab world. There is a exciting story about the Arabic translation of A Tale of Love and Darkness. Some 7 years ago, a young student in Jerusalem, Arab-Palestinian student, was jogging, and he was shot in the head by Palestinians who thought he was Jewish. His loving family decided to finance the translation of A Tale of Love and Darkness into Arabic to commemorate the beloved son killed by fanatics and also to improve the understanding between Jews and Arabs. It's a very moving story.
Mas o senhor também, numa entrevista aqui, com um diálogo com um intelectual palestino, o senhor, era o Sari Nusseibeh. O senhor disse que as histórias, as narrativas, não devem ser conciliadas. Ele também é autor de um livro de memórias belíssimo que conta a mesma história do senhor, só que do ponto de vista palestino. Como absorver essas contradições todas, essas narrativas na literatura? É um desejo isso?
My friend Sari Nusseibeh, a Palestinian intellectual and writer, wrote a very powerful memoir called Once Upon a Country. This memoir conducts a certain dialogue, direct dialogue, with my Tale of Love and Darkness. His narrative is, of course, different than my narrative, and it will remain different. We cannot merge the narratives. He remembers the past differently than I remember it. Palestinians will always remember the past differently than Israelis. Fortunately, in order to make peace, we don't have to agree about the past. We only have to agree about the present and the future, especially about the future. We may remain divided about the past, and it might even be a blessing if we are divided about the past, because it provides for rich cultural creativity when there are different narratives of the same history.
Amos, vou retomar a questão da norma Cury, que eu acho que você não respondeu. O que você acha da arte judaica da diáspora comparada com a arte judaica de Israel? Saul Bellow, Isaac Bashevis Singer, Philip Roth, Woody Allen, te dizem alguma coisa ou você acha eles menores? Acha eles não são os judeus que combateram nos kibbutz, não são Amos Oz? Ou, enfim, há uma diferença entre o nacionalismo e a diáspora em termos artísticos?
All the artists you have mentioned and others have a wonderful Jewish sense of humor. And I find myself very close to their sense of humor. My grandmother used to say, when you have cried out all your tears, start laughing. And this is the essence of Jewish humor. I find a strong common denominator, not only with Saul Bellow and Philip Roth and Woody Allen, but even with Kafka, in his unique Jewish sense of humor. I think this is the great common denominator of Jewish writers in different countries and in different cultures, Israel or diaspora.
Você não acha superior a arte que se faz em Israel hoje do que da arte que é feita na diáspora? Você não acha que existe superioridade moral, ou ética, ou política?
No, I don't think there is such a thing as moral superiority of art. Art can be moral or can be immoral, it cannot be superior. I think there is a strong moral sensitivity both in Israeli Jewish writers and in diaspora Jewish writers. Very strong moral sensitivities.
Clarice Lispector, que seguiu uma tradição mística também muito importante na literatura judaica. O senhor é um leitor de Clarice?
She was translated successfully into Hebrew, and I read 2 of her books in Hebrew, and I was greatly impressed precisely by her surrealistic vision, by her sensibility, and yes, by her sense of humor.
Nós vamos fazer agora um pequeno intervalo e já voltamos com o nosso entrevistado de hoje, Amos Oz. Bem-vindos de volta ao Roda Viva. Ilustrando o programa, temos o cartunista Paulo Caruso e no centro da nossa arena, o escritor israelense Amos Oz. Amos Oz, um pensador alemão que se exilou nos Estados Unidos durante a Segunda Guerra, Theodor Adorno, depois ele escreveu que era impossível fazer poesia depois de Auschwitz, ou seja, depois dos campos de concentração, havia um limite, porque não dava mais para fazer arte como era feita antes. No caso de Israel, a comparação, obviamente, não é literal, mas como fazer ficção com o muro lá que está sendo construído para separar a Israel dos palestinos? Como a arte enfrenta uma situação dessa? Como a sua arte enfrenta essa situação?
Israel lives in a state of siege. It is surrounded by countries trying to destroy it, and at the same time, it is controlling and suppressing the Palestinians in the West Bank. This is a complex situation. But let me tell you this. Imagine a small village on the slopes of an erupting volcano. The volcano is smoking and fuming and sometimes throwing lava. But in the village, there is normalcy. People still think all night how to avoid the income tax. People still fancy all night the neighbor's wife or the neighbor's husband. People still run for office to be the mayor of the village. People still work in their gardens. I write about this normalcy in the middle of abnormalcy, about small-time people and everyday life in cataclysmic historical climate.
E a sua intenção qual seria? Seria distrair desse fato? Seria chamar atenção para esse fato? Ou denunciar uma existência numa situação cataclísmica?
Well, the important thing in a cataclysmic situation is to keep a sense of normalcy, to convey to your readers that life continues and that life is very important. Not only the news headlines are important, not only the statements of the politicians are important. Certainly not the acts of the terrorists are important, or the acts of the oppressors are important. It is important to raise children. It is important to read books. It is important to go to sit in a cafe and gossip. This is the importance of life. Now, when the poet Adorno said, when the philosopher Adorno said, after Auschwitz there will be no poetry, he suggested that we give the victory to the Nazis. I don't want to give the victory to the Nazis. I want poetry to prevail after Auschwitz. I want poetry to flourish in times of cataclysm. I believe this is the small people's answer to the historical cataclysm. Life goes on.
O senhor, enquanto professor de literatura num liceu, o senhor costumava aguçar o apetite dos seus alunos pela literatura como um processo erótico, como uma aventura carnal. O medo de morrer na guerra, no conflito permanente que é aquela zona, aproxima ou afasta as pessoas da sua literatura onírica e irônica, da música, da arte? E o seu medo de morrer é o que impulsiona você para escrever?
Fear of death makes you and me and all of us very alert. In the presence of death, you are wide awake. You are not sleepy. You are not absent-minded. You are very concentrated and very alert. Maybe a society like Israel, which lives under the constant threat of death, is a very alert society, wide awake, busy arguing and differing and disagreeing, creating, writing, reading, arguing. The proximity of death makes every one of us very alert and very wide awake.
Amos, eu estou lembrando de uma frase que eu gosto muito do seu colega Davi Grossman, que falando sobre o Bruno Schulz, que foi assassinado por um soldado nazista, disse que não queria mais falar uma língua, que é a língua dos humanos, em que se pode pronunciar a frase "eu matei o seu judeu". E aqui também no seu livro E a História Começa, eu peguei uma frase que o senhor mesmo destacou, que diz assim: não há uma única palavra na língua dos homens capaz de consolar os porquinhos da Índia que não sabem a razão da sua morte. Isso foi dito por um sobrevivente de Hiroshima. O senhor também fala nos seus livros sobre coisas muito difíceis, vivências terríveis, tragédias, né? Até eu peguei uma frase sua que é como se a vida fosse uma tragédia de erros, em que as pessoas não conseguem se comunicar, elas falam e o outro não entende, por causa disso acontecem desastres enormes. Eu queria saber como que o senhor faz para usar as palavras para expressar o que elas não conseguem mais expressar, se as palavras acabam ajudando ou atrapalhando. Como é possível usar as palavras para dizer o indizível?
You know, a misunderstanding is both a tragedy and a comedy. It is the nature of misunderstanding to be both tragic and funny. I write tragic comedies. I don't write in such a way that one paragraph in my book will be heartbreaking and the next paragraph will be funny. I write in such a way that every episode will be both painful and funny. I find the tragic comedy my way of dealing with the horrors of life. I find the tragic comedy the response from my soul, the response from my psyche to the horrors of life, to the catastrophes, to the calamities, to the threats of the future. So I think we all, as my grandmother said, we all need to laugh after we finish crying.
Monique, só uma dúvida primeiro. O que é esse filme que você está fazendo? A Caixa Preta, né?
A Caixa Preta.
O Amos tem alguma participação? Né?
Ainda não. Esse é o primeiro encontro. Se eu pudesse só fazer a pergunta sobre a Caixa Preta. Eu queria perguntar justamente sobre a Caixa Preta. Me lembra, interessante o livro feito de cartas, portanto até é muito difícil a sua adaptação, né? Onde cada vez que você lê a carta de um personagem, a impressão é que ele está certo, né? Todos têm a sua visão e à medida que você muda de carta, você muda também de perspectiva. Me lembra até muito o Mercador de Veneza de Shakespeare, o Shylock, a questão do Shylock, que é, né, impressionante. E eu queria saber de você se essa era a mesma intenção, assim, se essa minha percepção de todos estão certos, há uma quase certos, pelo menos.
You have just touching something very important in my writing. I don't write about good guys and bad guys. I write about clashes between right and right. Tragic clashes between right and right.
Wow.
By the way, I regard the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a clash between right and right.
Absolutely.
Between one very powerful claim and another no less powerful claim over the same land. This is the nature of tragedy, two powerful claims. Now, Black Box and all my books are not about good guys versus bad guys. When I get up in the morning, and I get up very early at 5 every morning, and I take a walk for 40 minutes in the desert where I live, and then I come back and I drink a cup of coffee, I sit myself by my desk, and I start asking myself, what if I were him? What if I were her? What if I were them? And I put myself in the shoes or under the skin of everybody. Yes, in Black Box, everybody is right and wrong. Everybody is right and everybody is wrong. This is the essence of the story. This is the essence of all my writing. When I wrote A Tale of Love and Darkness, it's about the tragedy of my parents, and they are both right and they are both wrong. So I write about people who are always right. There is, let me conclude with an anecdote. There is a good Jewish story about a rabbi who, in his capacity as a judge, has to decide between two claims over the same goat. He listened to everybody and then he said, both of you are right. When he came back home, his wife asked him, dear husband, how can they both be right if they claim the same goat? And he said, you know what, dear wife, you are also right. I am this rabbi. When I write a book, I am this rabbi. Everybody is right.
Mas essa capacidade de receber as contradições literariamente é uma riqueza muito grande na sua obra. No entanto, politicamente, Israel está vivendo esse problema de não conseguir um consenso que resolva essas contradições politicamente, né? O senhor também criticou recentemente o sistema eleitoral israelense, em particular a esquerda, denunciando a divisão da esquerda, a multiplicidade de partidos que acabavam não tendo assento no parlamento e levaram ao triunfo da direita. O que o senhor acha aí que a esquerda pode fazer para ajudar nesse problema atualmente em Israel?
It's very hard to be left and dovish in times of conflict. In times of conflict, people are first and foremost very angry. And angry people are hawkish and vote for the right. This is true not only of an international conflict, it's true of a family conflict. When there is a fight between husband and wife, or between parent and child, everybody is angry. When everybody is angry, everybody doesn't want compromises. My way of advocating compromise had been for more than 40 years now the attempt to explain the other, to convey the feelings of the other, not because the other is 100% right, the other is not 100% right, but the other may be 50% right. This is what I have been trying to convey both in my books and in my articles. It's a long way to go, but as it was mentioned here before, it took Europe 1,000 years of bloodshed and persecution and terrible, terrible wars before it stabilized into the present European Union. It will take us in the Middle East less than 1,000 years, and we will shed less blood. We, Israelis and Arabs, we will shed less blood than Europe. Too much blood, but less than Europe.
E por que a esquerda israelense e a esquerda israelense e palestina não conseguem se unir?
Well, because it's easy enough for Israeli left-wing intellectuals to talk to Palestinian left-wing intellectuals and agree on a compromise on a two-state solution, and we have done this many times. With my friend Sari Nusseibeh and other Palestinians, we have the solution. The politicians don't accept our solution because they lack courage and lack leadership. If I had to tell you with a metaphor what is the present situation between Israelis and Palestinians, I will say the following. The majority of Israelis are ready for a compromise, not happy but ready. The majority of the Palestinians are ready for a compromise, not happy but ready. So the patient, Israeli and Palestinian, the patient is ready for the surgery, but the doctors are cowards.
Você citou o seu bom humor e é um traço da literatura judaica. E eu sei que você é um apaixonado pela literatura do Sheryl Anderson também, que descrevia a solidão, frustração, arrependimento, preconceito, ódio, dor. Como você também descreve isso na Caixa Preta e em outros livros, Não Diga Noite e tal. Você nasceu num campo de refugiados. Viveu o suicídio da sua mãe, odiou seu pai, viveu pelo menos 5 guerras. De onde você tira o seu bom humor?
It comes from a tremendous fascination with people. I like to be among people. When I have time in the afternoon, after I have written all morning, I sat and wrote all morning, I go to a cafe in the small town of Arad where I live. I sit myself in a street cafe, and immediately there starts a conversation with strangers. They criticize my politics, they have things to say about my books, they argue with me, I argue with them. I like to be with people, and I have very warm attitude to the human being, to human beings. I think that despite of the many horrors that I saw in my life, I'm still curious. I have kept my curiosity.
O senhor prefere as pessoas ou os livros?
Well, I prefer people and I prefer books who are full of people. Books are also people. What are books?
Como é que o seu cotidiano, o senhor, que é duro, imagino, acompanhar esse cotidiano israelense, o senhor acompanha permanentemente jornal, televisão, internet, ou o senhor tenta se manter um pouco afastado das discussões, das brigas, das polêmicas?
Well, I'm not on the internet. I have no email. And I'm not in the Facebook for reasons of self-defense. But I read the paper in the morning, and I listen to the newsreels on the radio several times a day. So I'm in touch with reality. Very often I respond. I write an angry article, I make a public appearance, I get interviewed on the radio or on television, and I respond to current events. But my mornings are devoted to writing. After I take the 40 minutes walk in the desert, and I drink my cup of coffee, I disconnect the telephone, I switch off the radio, and I sit for 6 or 7 hours writing, or at least waiting for the moment to write, waiting for the voices I need to hear in order to write. This I do in the morning. Then I take a little siesta. In the afternoon, I go back to my study to destroy what I wrote in the morning, or sometimes to do public work, to go and give a lecture, to go and give a public appearance, to go and participate in a political panel. This I do in the afternoon and in the evening.
O senhor, para nós brasileiros, o que o senhor recomendaria de literatura feita hoje em Israel? Quais são os bons escritores que o senhor considera bons escritores ou que vale a pena ler, mesmo discordando?
Well, I don't know enough about Brazilian literature to give you...
Não, literatura israelense.
Israeli literature, I highly recommend that you translate more and read more of Israeli literature, because it's one of the most vivacious, dynamic, and provocative literatures in the world. And not only for political reasons. Also because it's a literature of immigrants, or the children of immigrants, or the grandchildren of immigrants. And in Jewish Israel, everyone is an immigrant from somewhere, or the child of an immigrant. And a literature of immigrants has about itself a certain restlessness, a certain love-hate relationship with the old country. All of this, I think, may interest readers in Brazil, because Brazil is also a country of diversity. As far as I have seen it in a few days, it's a country of diversity. It's a country of polars, many polars and many different sides to the spectrum. It's a big spectrum of human beings, of races, of opinions, of traditions. So I think Israeli literature might be of particular relevance for Brazilian readers.
Como leitor, o senhor gosta de que tipo de, vamos dizer, literatura nacional? Inglesa, francesa, americana, brasileira? O senhor tem alguma preferência?
Well, my great preference is the Russian literature of the 19th century. They were my mentors, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and in particular Chekhov. He is my prime mentor. I learned a great deal from Chekhov. I learned from him how to erase the line between tragedy and comedy. Tragedy and comedy are not two different planets. They are no more than two different windows through which you see the same landscape of the life. This I learned from Chekhov. So yes, Russian literature of the 19th century is my favorite.
Ok, nós vamos agora para mais um intervalo e a gente volta daqui a pouco para continuar esse Roda Viva com Amos Oz. O Roda Viva de hoje recebe o escritor israelense Amos Oz. Amos, nos últimos tempos, teve o fenômeno, enfim, o movimento da Primavera Árabe. Tunísia, caiu a ditadura, Egito, caiu a ditadura, Síria, uma grande revolta. Em todo o Oriente Médio há essa movimentação contra os governos que vêm oprimindo a região há tempo. Isso prejudica, ajuda a sua causa, a causa do Estado, de dois Estados em Israel, um palestino e um israelense?
It might help. It's too early to tell because I am not yet sure that we are really witnessing an Arab Spring. People use the term Arab Spring because they think history will repeat itself, and like the collapse of the Soviet Empire and all the satellite states turning to democracy, the same thing is destined to happen in the Arab world. Not necessarily. I think in some Arab countries, what we see is not Arab Spring, but Islamist winter.
Quais, por exemplo?
I can't give names to the countries because it's too early to know. But I know that democracy will only strike roots in countries where there is a strong middle class and where there is at least a grain, a nuclear of civil society. Where there is no middle class and no civil society, there is no chance for democracy. So there is a certain chance in Egypt, not certainty, but a certain chance. I doubt it very much about Libya. I am very skeptical about Syria. I am hopeless about Saudi Arabia. But I am very hopeful about Iran, because in Iran, although there is no rebellion just now, in Iran there is a strong secular middle class, and also there is in Iran some grain of civil society.
Mudando um pouco para outra parte do mundo, a Europa também está numa grande crise, está um grande tumulto econômico, social. Isso, qual a influência dessa movimentação na Europa, da crise do euro, para a posição sua ou para a posição do senhor que o senhor defende em relação à política israelense?
Well, I never believed in Darwinistic capitalism. I have always been a social democrat and always believed in the welfare state, the third way between capitalism and communism. I think after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Darwinistic capitalism prevailed in many countries. And now there is a major crisis of Darwinistic capitalism. Maybe the third way will have a chance in some countries now. Maybe it will have a chance in Israel. We had huge protests in Israel. 500,000 people marched in the streets of Tel Aviv. 500,000 in Tel Aviv will be the equivalent of 10 million in Sao Paulo. It's a huge crowd.
Yes.
And yet it was completely non-violent. Not a single glass was shattered. There was not a single episode of violence from a demonstrator or police brutality. Because the slogan was not down with the government or down with the rich. The slogan was, let's renew the solidarity. Let's renew the social solidarity. So I am cautiously hopeful.
Vamos ouvir uma pergunta de um escritor, o Michel Laub, que é de origem judaica. Também ele vai fazer uma pergunta para o senhor aqui.
Eu queria saber se já houve alguma entrevista em que você não foi perguntado sobre a situação do Oriente Médio. E se essa mistura de literatura e política incomoda você ou é algo inevitável?
Well, I have become philosophical about this mixture of politics and literature. It is apparently the destiny of every writer from a troubled part of the world. If you are a writer in the Middle East, or in Africa, or in the Balkans, or perhaps here in South America as well, people will always ask you questions about the state of the nation. If you are a Norwegian writer, nobody will ask you about the politics of Norwegia or the strategy of Norwegia. They will ask you about your books. So I am philosophical about it, but I hope, and always hope in every interview, that at least some of the questions will be about my books.
Então vamos falar do seu livro.
Faz uma pergunta
Um Monte de Mau
literária.
Conselho, que está sendo lançado agora, que foi escrito em 1976. O senhor publicou em 76. O senhor volta aos seus antigos livros, o senhor relê a sua obra, ou uma vez publicado, o senhor esquece e parte para o próximo? E queria também que o senhor comentasse as circunstâncias em que o senhor escreveu esse livro e como o senhor enxerga ele na sua obra.
Well, The Hill of Evil Counsel is a cycle of 3 interrelated stories. It really is a novel in stories. And it's about the life of small-time people in times of great historical catastrophes. Immediately after the Nazi Holocaust in Europe, and immediately before the birth of Israel through bloodshed and war and violence. But this is not about the leaders, and it's not about the politicians, and it's not about the soldiers. It's about everyday people, a vet, a doctor, a printer, people who try to maintain a certain normalcy and are overwhelmed by the circumstances. Some of these stories is told from the point of view of a boy, of a young boy, who observes the world of the grown-ups, which is full of secrets, full of censorship. The grown-ups don't share with the child, with the boy, all their secrets because it's too heavy for the boy. Again, this book is written with a combination of melancholy and humor, which is my hallmark. Now you ask me if I read my old books. I don't. When I read an old book, something bad happens to me one way or another. Either I read it and I say, today I could write better, or else I read it and I say, I will never write so well again. In both cases, I am frustrated, so it's better to read other people's books.
Mas às vezes alguma ideia expressa nos livros anteriores não pode causar incômodo anos depois. Por exemplo, aqui nesse livro tem uma personagem que está cultivando um jardim com flores, o senhor descreve ele de maneira muito bonita, e depois a personagem imagina um rebanho de cabras árabes chegando e destruindo aquele jardim, os canteiros e comendo as flores, etc. Esse tipo de imagem não causa incômodo no senhor ao se flagrar descrevendo esse tipo de situação que é política?
No, it doesn't bother me at all because I do not always agree with my characters. I very often don't agree with my characters. My characters are not my representatives and they don't speak for me. I write them, but I don't put words into their mouth. They speak their fears, their apprehensions, their suspicion, their insecurity.
Mas está difícil hoje em dia, o momento histórico é propício à leitura da ficção e da literatura? A ironia, por exemplo, hoje em dia é possível? O senhor, a leitura é muito literal hoje em dia, não é? Quando eu mesmo estou fazendo essa pergunta para o senhor porque cobrei o senhor sobre uma imagem literária que não é coincidente com a do autor. É um momento propício para a leitura de ficção?
I think every time in history is a good time to read literature. Every time in history is good for skepticism, for humor, for ambivalence, for a variety of points of view. Every time in history, even in terrible times, even under tyrannies, which I am not living under tyranny, but even under tyrannies, under Stalin, under Hitler, it's good to combine melancholy with humor. It's good to have ambivalence. It's good to be skeptical and critical. And it's good to express the opinions of many different people.
Ô Norma, alguma
pergunta? Eu vou fazer uma pergunta que são 3.
Opa.
Primeiro, qual é a sua opinião sobre a cobertura jornalística do conflito árabe-israelense? 2, qual é a sua opinião sobre os críticos dos seus livros? E 3, qual é a sua opinião sobre os leitores do seu livro? Porque você menciona em algum lugar que o mau leitor é um amante psicopata que rasga as roupas da mulher. Então, o bom leitor e o mau leitor.
Yeah. Yes. Well, the conflict, my view is the conflict is very often depicted in the media outside the Middle East as a Wild West film with good guys and bad guys. It's not a Western movie and there are no good guys and bad guys. That's one answer to one question. The second question, I believe in a reader who is not looking for the gossip behind the story. I believe in a reader who asks himself or herself, what part of the book is relevant to my life? Where am I in the book? No, not where is the author behind the book. Where am I behind the book? Not to how many women did the author made love, but what this scene of lovemaking evokes inside me. This is the reader for which I crave, and this is the reader for which I hope.
E os críticos?
Well, critics are readers with pens. So my view of the critics is no different than my view of readers. I aspire for a sensitive critic who asks himself or herself, where am I in this book? How much of myself can I find in this book? This, I believe, is the right attitude to a novel, and this is what I expect from my critics and from my readers. I don't always get it, but I expect it.
Mas teve algum crítico que o ajudou, que te chamou a atenção para algum aspecto da sua obra, ou que fez o senhor descobrir ou melhorar alguma coisa dos seus livros?
Yes, there were some critics, especially in the early years, who pointed out some of my flaws, and I read them very carefully. My flaws are still with me because they are imminent, but I tried at least to moderate, to limit my flaws. So yes, there are some critics to whom I'm grateful.
O senhor leva a sério, o senhor já recebeu vários prêmios literários, mas o senhor leva a sério prêmios? O senhor respeita o prêmio Nobel, por acaso? O senhor escreve pensando no Nobel? Pergunto isso porque o seu nome sempre aparece nas listas, mas o senhor gostaria de ganhar o Nobel? Acha aquilo bom?
I can assure you that if I never get the Nobel Prize, I will not die an unhappy man. I have received my share of prizes, and literary prizes are warming the heart of the recipient. But there is something funny about literary prizes, you know. They give you an award for doing something you will do anyway. You have no choice, you must do. It's as if somebody was giving me an award for inhaling air, for breathing air. Can I not breathe? I cannot evade breathing. Even if instead of all those awards, there were penalties, and I were made to pay penalties, I will still write the same books. But don't tell this to the prize committee.
All right, I'll do that.
Mas Israel tem condições políticas e literárias de receber um prêmio Nobel hoje em dia, não?
Ah, o Amos tem, ele tem.
Na sua opinião?
I have no idea about the politics of the Nobel Prize Committee. I can't answer the question because I don't know their politics. I don't know those people and I don't know their politics.
Vamos ouvir uma crítica da sua obra, o que ela diz, a professora Noemi Jane.
Eu vou aproveitar e também vou fazer duas perguntas de uma vez. O senhor falou que alguns críticos apontaram algumas falhas na sua literatura. Eu queria saber, na sua opinião, quais são algumas das suas falhas. E uma outra curiosidade que eu tenho é porque o senhor disse que começou a escrever porque queria ganhar sorvete, né? Porque os seus pais levavam o senhor numa sorveteria e o senhor tinha que ficar quietinho para poder depois ganhar o sorvete e ficava imaginando histórias enquanto isso. Eu queria saber se o senhor ainda quer ganhar sorvete.
The flaws in my writing I leave to the critics. It's their business and they have to make a living somehow. So I leave the flaws to the critics.
A gente quer saber agora. Agora queremos saber.
Na sua opinião?
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, sometimes my stories don't climb as high as I would love them to climb. I would love them to climb higher. You know, in every book, there are 3 books. The book that I wrote, the book that you have read, and there is a 3rd book, which is the book I should have written if I had enough strength. If I was a Tolstoy or a Chekhov, I would write this book. So I know I have my limits. Now about the ice cream. Yes, when I was a little boy, my parents used to take me to cafes, and they conducted conversations with their friends for 77 hours. And they told me to keep quiet, to shut up, and they promised me that if I shut up, I will get ice cream in the end. So I became a little spy. I started spying on the other guests of the cafe, overhearing snatches of conversation, looking at the clothes, looking at the shoes. Shoes always tell stories. And looking at the body language, and inventing stories about these people. This is a wonderful pastime, by the way, not just for writers. It's recommended to every one of you. If you have to kill time at an airport or a railway station, or a waiting room of a clinic, observe the other people and try to guess who they are and where they are from. It's a wonderful pastime and you yet get ice cream in the end.
Mas o senhor ainda quer sorvete?
I love ice cream. Yeah.
É isso? Por isso que o senhor escreve, para ganhar sorvete?
No, I write to impress the girls.
Quando você, uma curiosidade, quando você escreve, você tenta inventar o que ela faria, o que ele faria, né? Mas quando você escreve, é um quarto escuro totalmente, como a revelação de uma fotografia que vai surgindo, ou na medida em que você senta para fazer um livro, é porque você já sabe o ponto final e você vai fazer o trajeto?
When I sit down starting to write a book, I have ideas. Especially I have voices, characters.
Right.
Sometimes I also have a strong sense of place where it happens. But in the course of writing, things change. Sometimes the characters take over. I remember when I wrote an early novel called My Michael, told from a woman's point of view in the first person, which I won't dare to do today, but at the age of 25 I thought I knew everything about women.
Yes.
So I remember the protagonist, Hannah, arguing with me. I would say to her, I'm not going to write this. Go to a lady writer, I cannot write this. It's not in character for you. And she will say to me, who are you to tell me what's in character for me and what is not? You just shut up and write. And I would say, no, I'm not writing this, I'm sorry, go to another writer. And we will argue and in the end compromise somehow. So when I feel a certain resistance from the characters, when they no longer respond like puppets, but when they resist me, I know there is life in the work.
Right.
When it's going too easy, like butter, I know something is wrong.
Já que estamos falando de sorvete, de infância, você se disse um apaixonado pelo Capitão Nemo, nas 20 mil léguas submarinas, e pelo mundo utópico que ele criou, né? E você é um amante do deserto, ou seja, é um lugar nenhum, né? Você mora em lugar nenhum. Se a sua imaginação pudesse criar um lugar utópico, onde seria? Que povo habitaria esse lugar? Quem seriam seus vizinhos? E que época seria essa? E eu também queria saber se a utopia do Ben Gurion fracassou e a utopia bíblica, eu, guardião do meu irmão, se isso fracassou.
My utopia, I can tell you in one word, peace. This is my utopia. Now, Israel was born out of monumental dreams. Other countries are born out of history, out of geography, out of politics, out of demography. Israel was born out of dream. Everything that is born out of a dream is destined to taste like a disappointment. Everything. The only way to keep a dream perfect and rosy and wonderful is never to leave it out. This is true of traveling abroad. This is true of planting a garden. This is true of living out a sexual fantasy. The only way to keep it perfect is not to leave it out. Now, Israel tastes like a disappointment because it was born out of a dream. The disappointment is not in the nature of Israel, it is in the nature of dreams.
O senhor falou que tem o costume de observar pessoas em aeroportos, né, e observar as manias e comportamentos. O senhor leva isso diretamente para os seus livros? O senhor anota em fichas, desenha? Como é que o senhor constitui os personagens dos seus livros? Qual é o seu processo aí de caracterização dos personagens?
No, I don't take snapshots and I don't take immediate notes. I observe people. And then when I write a book, suddenly there is one of my characters who has the strange habit to scratch his right ear with his left hand, like this. Now, I don't even know where I have seen this gesture, but I have seen it somewhere. I no longer remember where it comes from, and it doesn't matter, but it goes into the book. So it's not like photography. It's more like photosynthesis. The apple is made of earth and sun and water and apple seed, but it doesn't resemble any of them.
Tá certo, vamos fazer agora um rápido intervalo e voltamos daqui a pouco para finalizar esse Roda Viva. Estamos no último bloco do Roda Viva com Amos Oz. Uma pergunta, Amos Oz. Israel, quando vem à baila no Brasil, sempre se pensa no fundamentalismo israelense, né? O fundamentalismo religioso. Você se definiria como um homem religioso? Você se definiria ainda como um sionista? Como você se definiria?
Well, I'm a secular man. I don't believe in any religion. Personally, I even think God is not religious. I think God is not even interested in religion. But this is, you have to interview God and not me. I regard myself as a Zionist, but Zionism is a surname, not a first name. There are Marxist Zionists and right-wing Zionists and religious Zionism. So when I say Zionist, I simply mean I believe that Israel is the answer to the problems of some of the Jews, not all of them. It's the right answer for the problems of some of the Jews, and I think it was just to create the Israeli homeland for homeless Jews after World War II. This is my Zionism, and in this I believe. Other than that, I believe in peace and reconciliation between nations.
Eu retomo a pergunta de novo da Norma Cury. O sionismo, no começo, foi associado ao kibbutz, a uma certa mística socialista, uma nova nação, os pioneiros, até o senhor fala muito sobre isso no seu livro de memórias. Esse sonho acabou, o sonho de Ben-Gurion, isso faliu, não há mais espaço para isso? Ou o senhor ainda acredita que é possível, num Estado binacional, ter o kibbutz, ter o socialismo, ter o trabalho na terra? O senhor acredita isso possível ainda?
The kibbutz is having a very interesting comeback now in Israel. It's changed, it's reformed, it is less rigid and formalistic than it used to be, but it's now again attractive to many young Israelis who do not want the usual rat race. Wherever I look around me, in Israel and probably in Brazil, I see people who are working too hard in order to make more money than they really need, in order to buy things they don't really want, in order to impress people they don't really like. People who are fed up with this are looking for an alternative. And Israel initially offered an alternative. This alternative then died down. Israel became very capitalistic, very normal state, very Western state. But there are many voices in Israel, as I told you earlier, calling to come back to the life of solidarity, of social solidarity. This has a chance. Again, I'm not a prophet. I cannot tell you if it's a 50% chance or a 30% chance or a 70% chance, but there is a chance.
Mas o senhor acha que o movimento geral da sua juventude, da sua infância, que o senhor retratou, aquele ímpeto heróico de construir uma nação igualitária, de lá para cá, tem melhorado, tem piorado? O Estado de Israel está se tornando mais parecido com o que se pretendia?
No, you can't be a teenager twice. You can only be a teenager once. And when I was teenager, Israel was teenager. I'm older than Israel. Israel was teenager with teenager dreams and teenager fantasies and teenager aspirations. This is gone. I am a mature man now, and Israel is a mature country. We can select from the past certain highlights and try to install them again. We cannot revive the past. There is no such thing as living the honeymoon years once again. There is no way.
Amos, mas o sionismo humanista não está tendo muita força no voto. E nem os judeus da diáspora têm força na política israelense, não é?
Well, I disagree with you. I think humanist Zionism is still very strong, and in Israel itself it has millions of supporters who are not religious, not fanatics, not militant right-wingers, but supporters of pragmatism. And I think the same applies to many, many individuals in the Jewish diaspora. Not everybody, of course. We have our share of fanatics and zealots. We have our hawks, and they have the majority right now in Israeli politics. But there is a very strong pragmatist entity within the Israeli and within the Jewish civilization.
Passar uma pergunta feita pelo professor de Estudos Orientais da Universidade de São Paulo, o Paulo Daniel Fará.
Recentemente houve uma série de manifestações israelenses a respeito de moradia e outros temas, sem que fosse feita referência ao fato de que a ocupação israelense dos territórios palestinos abala a economia israelense e a qualidade de vida dos cidadãos. Quais as reivindicações da sociedade israelense e qual a força do campo da paz em Israel atualmente?
Well, I am personally against building settlements in the occupied territories, and I have been against the building of settlements in the occupied territories right from the first settlement, from the first building, from the first brick. I thought it was both a moral and a pragmatical mistake for the Israelis to build settlements in the occupied territories. Now, about the settlements, Israel is divided in the middle. I would say roughly half and half. Half the Israelis support the settlements, half the Israelis object the settlements. I said earlier, and I still agree with myself, that in times of conflict, their byproduct of a conflict is anger. This is true in every conflict. It's true in a family conflict. There is a lot of anger in Israel. And there are angry Israelis who say, despite of all the hostility, let's build more settlements in the occupied territories. This is very often the consequence of anger and frustration.
E pensando vamos dizer, no ódio e na frustração do outro lado, dos palestinos, se o senhor fosse palestino, o que fazer hoje?
If I were a Palestinian, is a question which I ask myself very often. If I were a Palestinian, I will search a livable compromise with the Israelis based on two states, Israel next door to Palestine, simply because there is no alternative to this two-state solution. And indeed, many pragmatic Palestinians share this solution today.
Mas o senhor defenderia as fronteiras de 67 para a construção desses dois estados ou não?
Basically, yes. I would say that the border has to be based on 67 lines with some mutual adjustments, some swap of land because reality has changed. But basically, the Palestinian state should have the territories of 67.
Sendo realista, há chance de levar isso adiante, de conseguir isso em Israel de hoje, na sociedade israelense de hoje?
Yes, I think it can be accomplished, and in fact, a few times in the future, far-reaching compromises from the Israeli side were made by right-wing leaders. Prime Minister Menachem Begin gave back the whole of Sinai, 3 times bigger than Israel itself, in return for a document of peace with Egypt. Prime Minister Sharon, also a hawk and a right-winger, unilaterally evacuated all the settlements and all the troops from the Gaza Strip. Prime Minister Olmert, who grew up in the far right, in the radical right, offered the Palestinians a two-state solution based on the 67 line, minus 1% or so. So it is not unthinkable that in the future it will be a right-wing, not a left-wing leader who will make the necessary compromises. However, it will have to be a courageous leader, and he will have, or she will have, to find courageous partners on the Palestinian side at the same time.
Amos,
Quem são esses
Paulo Daniel Fará, na
líderes
sua entrevista,
corajosos?
I don't know their names, I don't see them, but people are full of surprises. You know, one of my deepest convictions is that people change. Nobody expected that Winston Churchill will dismantle the British Empire. Winston Churchill, of all people, but he did. Nobody expected Charles de Gaulle to take France out of North Africa, but he did. Nobody expected President Sadat to come to Jerusalem and recognize Israel, but he did. Nobody expected Mikhail Gorbachev to undo the Soviet bloc, but he did. So people are full of surprises. I don't know who this leader will be. Maybe he or she still don't know that they will be the leader. But the moment will come when brave leaders on both sides will do the inevitable. I talk about this in terms of a medical surgery, of an operation, creating two states. in their heart of hearts, the present leaders know that this is the only option. They know it. They don't have the courage to do it.
O Paulo Fará, na pergunta dele, enfatizou a reivindicação da juventude israelense como reivindicações de classe média em relação aos seus próprios problemas, não conectados ao problema palestino. O senhor acha que a nova geração israelense está cansada dessa crise, quer pensar em suas questões de classe média, como no Brasil, na Europa, nos Estados Unidos? Estão menos envolvidas com a questão palestina?
Yes, the new generation is tired, and the new generation would like to concentrate on economical and social issues, but they will find out very soon that they cannot separate. If the resources of Israel go into building new settlements in the occupied territories, that means a certain burden on the economy. If Israel has to spend a high percentage of its product on the military, this has a certain significance in the economy and in the social structure. So you cannot separate the issues. The issue of peace dominates all the other issues, and the young generation in Israel, if they have not found it yet, they are destined to find it in the process.
A Hannah Arendt disse que as pessoas sem capacidade de contar histórias são incapazes de aprender a existência ou um ser humano. O senhor, que é considerado Voltaire da paz, o Calvino israelense, o que o senhor apreendeu do povo judeu e do povo árabe? O que é ser um judeu e o que é ser um árabe?
Now, these are two very big questions, what is to be a Jew and what is to be an Arab. The question of what is to be an Arab, I leave for the Arabs to answer. I don't want to answer this question in the place of the Arabs. It's a question to the Arabs, and it's for the Arabs to answer. What is to be a Jew, I tried to answer in all my books and even through this interview. I mentioned humor, skepticism, argumentativeness, and other qualities. These are the building blocks of the Jewish civilization through thousands of years.
Amos, no livro Fima, que é um dos meus livros preferidos, tem um capítulo que se chama Fima esquece de esquecer. E nesse capítulo, Fima, parece que em hebraico deve existir uma proximidade muito grande entre as palavras esquecimento e fenecimento. Foi assim que foi traduzido em português. E eu fiquei curiosa, porque Israel tem um passado muito difícil, assim como os habitantes de Israel também têm histórias muito difíceis no seu passado. E é muito bom lembrar dessas histórias, mas também é importante esquecer dessas histórias. Eu queria saber se, na sua opinião, como acontece com o Fima, o senhor acha mais importante lembrar ou esquecer?
Well, I'm glad you like Fima. I like him too. I think it's one of my better novels. And the chapter you refer to is called originally, Fima Forgets What He Had Forgotten. Now, there is an anecdote about a tourist who asks an Israeli Jew, "Why have you come to this country?" And the Israeli Jew answers, "We came here to forget." And the tourist asks, "You came here to forget what?" And the Israeli Jew says, "I forgot." Now, the first forgetfulness is healthy and desirable. The second forgetfulness is not. It's good to forget. It's not good to forget what we have forgotten.
Que livro o senhor está escrevendo agora? O que o senhor está escrevendo nesse momento?
Well, I've just read a novel by Ian McEwan called Solar, which I enjoyed very much. What I'm writing now, this I never discuss. I'm reluctant to expose my pregnancy to X-rays. It's not good for the baby. Excuse me.
O senhor contou um pouco antes de nós começarmos a entrevista que os atores brasileiros que o senhor conhecia eram Clarice Lispector e Jorge Amado. Da Clarice Lispector o senhor já falou. Jorge Amado, o que o senhor achou? Atraiu o senhor? Gostou? Não gostou?
Well, I have to admit he attracted me more when I was a young man than he attracts me today. he appealed to me, had a great appeal to me many years ago when I was a young reader. When I try to reread him today, the effect is less powerful than original. Why that is, I don't know. Maybe I changed, maybe he changed.
Tá bom, tá bom. Monique, você quer fazer uma pergunta, uma última?
Numa outra pesquisa para um filme que eu espero realizar um dia, trabalhando com uma historiadora australiana, ela colocou uma questão que, após o Holocausto, muitas crianças que estavam na primeira infância naquela época, elas, uma quantidade muito grande, teria tido uma reação de autodestruição, né? A autoestima ela é tão destruída que depois do Holocausto isso é uma consequência avassaladora. E eu queria saber se de alguma maneira alguns personagens seus trazem e carregam isso.
Yes, some of my characters, although they are not direct Holocaust survivors, they belong in the generation after the Holocaust. And some of my characters do have a certain urge of self-destruction, a certain urge of self-hatred even. Mm-hmm. A people that had been so extensively hated by so many different people in so many different places, mm-hmm. and hated so vehemently, yes. Such a people can't help itself asking, what's wrong with me? Mm-hmm. Is there anything wrong with me? Mm-hmm. It's like when everything is looking at you in a party in a funny way, you look down to see if your zipper is really open.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I grew up among people who were Holocaust survivors. Mm-hmm. And some of them were aggressive, and some of them were depressive, mm-hmm. and some of them were lacking sense of confidence, mm-hmm. and some of them were lacking sense of identity. Mm-hmm. But this is the population of Israel. Mm-hmm. Israel is one big refugee camp.
Yeah.
Palestine is also a refugee camp. Mm-hmm. The clash between Israel and Palestine is a tragic clash between two refugee camps, mm-hmm. between two former victims of Europe. Mm-hmm. Both the Arabs and the Jews, in two different ways, were the victims of Europe.
Mm-hmm. Os Estados Unidos, Amos, quais as suas expectativas em relação à política americana para com Israel? Barack Obama é uma decepção para o senhor?
Barack Obama evoked messianic expectations. People expected him to walk on the water. He couldn't deliver this. He couldn't deliver this. Vis-à-vis the Middle East, I think he had done his humble best to encourage the two parties to get closer together. I don't think America could point a gun at Israel or at the Palestinians and with a gun point say, now you make peace, America is telling so, or else I blow up your head. This is not going to work. And if it is going to work, the peace will be no peace at all. The thing that America can do, and not only America, Brazil as well, every country as well, the thing to do now is to give both sides as much empathy and support as you can, because the partition and the creation of two states is going to be a painful decision both for the Israelis and for the Palestinians. They both need every ounce of empathy they can get. So you in Brazil, for instance, and Obama in America, they should no longer ask themselves, am I pro-Palestine or am I pro-Israel? You have to be pro-peace.
Mas é que sempre se fala muito do lobby judaico nos Estados Unidos, que é uma coisa poderosíssima e que força o governo a ter uma política de apoio, em final das contas, ao governo israelense. E que se esse apoio econômico fosse tirado, a situação mudaria. O senhor concorda com essa análise ou não?
No, I don't. I think people tend to exaggerate the strength of the Jewish lobby. It's one of many lobbies in America. There is a very powerful oil lobby in America which is strictly pro-Arab, and it's no less powerful than the Jewish lobby. And the economical aid of America to Israel is now marginal. It's about 2% of the Israeli budget every year comes from the United States. 2% are important, but they are not life and death. Israel no longer lives at the expense of America. So all of this is greatly exaggerated. America could help both the Palestinians and the Israelis by extending help and reassurances and even guarantees to both sides. But I don't believe in American gunpoint.
E a China? O senhor está vivendo no século XXI que a China está ganhando protagonismo. Ela pode ter peso nessa questão?
China can be important if it wants to be important. So far, China has not been very active on Middle East. But if China wants to be significant, it can be very significant. By the way, many of my books were translated into Chinese, and A Tale of Love and Darkness was even selected one of the best books of the year 2007 in China, which is remarkable because the cultures are so far away.
Uma curiosidade, traduções dos seus livros. O senhor supervisiona as traduções para o inglês? Porque nos livros vem o título em hebreu e depois em inglês. Qual que é a relação sua com a versão em inglês?
Well, I work closely with the English translator because the English translation is the only one that can hurt me. The other translations can't hurt me, I can't read them. But I believe translating a work of literature is like playing a violin concerto on the piano. It can be done very successfully on one strict condition. Never try to force the piano to produce the sounds of the violin. This will be grotesque. So I have been saying to all my translators, including people who translate me into languages I shall never be able to read, I say to every one of my translators, please be unfaithful in order to be loyal.
Agora, o senhor cresceu no meio, que no seu livro o senhor diz isso, que todo mundo falava 15 línguas, 16 línguas, e o senhor, sua mãe, seu pai, seus avós, o senhor cresceu vamos dizer, sob o mandado britânico, aprendeu inglês e aprendeu hebreu. O senhor não fala outras línguas por resistência, por falta do quê? De curiosidade?
No. I was busy all my life learning my own Hebrew. I'm like a violinist. I am devoted to the violin. I don't play the piano. But my parents, who were great polyglots and spoke many, many languages, in the 1940s, they did not want me to know any European language because in the 1940s they were afraid that if I knew even one European language, I might be seduced by the deadly charms of Europe. I'll go to Europe and they will kill me. I'll catch my death.
Uma última pergunta, Norma.
Não, eu fiquei curiosa sobre as traduções. Se o senhor não pode acompanhar as traduções, como é que o senhor sabe como que o senhor está sendo traduzido em chinês, por exemplo?
Sometimes I get the reviews, but the secret is in every country to insist on being published by a good publishing house. Assuming that a good publishing house will not try to economize on the translation and will commission a good translator. I am very fortunate here in Brazil to be published by Companhia das Letras, and I know they guarantee that the translations will be as good as translations can be, and my books are translated into 41 languages.
Ok. O Roda Viva de hoje foi gravado por isso nós não tivemos a participação dos tuiteiros e da plateia virtual. Foi gravado porque a gente precisa botar a legenda do Amos Oz, que falou em inglês. Eu agradeço a presença do escritor, para nós é uma honra ter o Amos Oz aqui, e dos nossos entrevistadores, o Paulo, a Norma Cury, a Monique Gardenberg e a Noemi Jaffe. Boa noite a todos, do cartunista Paulo Caruso, boa noite a todos, a gente volta na próxima semana.